Hey, run at once. This is Sauce123. We're coming back for part 4 of my 5'10", 6-max Zoom session. I think I go on the upswing pretty soon, so I'm crossing my fingers. It's been a few weeks since I watched this footage, but we'll see. There should be some interesting hands here, I believe, too. So without further ado, I want to get into it. This is where we left off in the last video. I get to the river with King 10 here, and then we'll see what happens. So I'll be opening 7-9 on the button, and I should be folding against a raise. I think, it's funny. I think I got way better at no limit between the time when I recorded part 3 and between now. I've just been playing no limit for like the past month. I've been playing, didn't quite finish, but I'm almost done getting completely destroyed by WCG in the challenge, which obviously sucks. But I studied a ton. Trying to get better at no limit. And I feel like I played really well, despite the fact of how crushed I got. I feel way more confident in no limit hold'em than I did a little while ago. That being said, I'm studying, basically all heads up stuff, but most of it should transfer. So I think I'll have some criticism for myself and some criticism for my thought processes from before. So I'll try to bring you guys some of that. Definitely something I am as a poker player is very self-critical. I don't know. I'll probably peel this 5-3. Definitely I will now. Getting this kind of price 3-way with this sort of hand, I think it's got to be a peel. It's like still pretty close. Like you can fold if you want. This is a spot for a C bet, I think. I mean, the interesting thing about this Queen-Queen 4 board is that there's two things which should make us a little bit leery. First is that he flat calls from the small blind versus under the gun raise, so he probably has something, pretty darn good. He also probably has a lot of queens, so like Queen Jack suited, King Queen suited, King Queen offsuit, Ace Queen suited. Those hands all make a lot of sense, as do like Jacks through 9s and Ace King. So, we might not actually get as many folds as we like quote should in this spot because his range is actually quite a bit stronger than ours, although it's less nutty. That being said, I'm still fine with bluffing with a hand like King 8 suited here. I think that's air. The only hands that we would ever beat in this situation are like Jack 10 suited and maybe 10-9 suited, and I think most of those are getting bluffed later anyway. Like this King 8 is pretty garbagey in this situation. Sorry, I'm under the gun +1. The same analysis is fine. Definitely fold the gutter there. We don't want to be floating, in position with the player still to act on that sort of board with that weak of a hand. Certainly not. Ace 4 is sort of a fine open on the button, especially for 2.5x. If it's 3x, it's a little bit borderline. It's like towards the bottom of our range, but I think still fine. Obviously, having an ace in our hand is kind of a big deal. We're going to get 3-bet a good amount less. So, this is a spot. This is an example of like how I want to criticize my play. So we got this open from the hijack, and it seems like we should be 3-betting with mostly hands that are around the bottom of my calling range. And it seems like 6-7 is like below where the bottom of my calling range is. Like I think that 8-7 would be too weak to call here, or certainly close to too weak. And that seems like more of the kind of hands I want to be 3-betting. Like 8-7, 9-8, 10-9 suited. Those are like good 3-betting hands here. 7-6 just seems a little bit too weak. If I was 3-betting 7-6 every time, I would just end up 3-betting too much. So I think I could easily take a hand like Jack 9 suited or Queen 8 suited and 3-bet that instead of 7-6 suited. Both of those hands are going to be connected and suited and going to have higher equity. So I think that I'm just spewy here. Don't like it. And here, just to flesh it out, I know what I was thinking. What I was thinking was that I was like, oh, well, yeah, if I'm only 3-betting, 9-8 suited, like these very few combos, then when I do 3-bet and he calls, he can really put me on those. So when the flop comes down, 7-5 deuce, he can know that I don't have 8-6 or something. But I think that's kind of fishy thinking on my part. It's like, yeah, he knows I don't have that, but it's not like stacks are that deep and I have a lot of, I can still bluff with other things. I just have to be aware of my range rather than widening it to some crazy extent. In my defense, I was, 3-betting 7-6 suited sometimes and folding sometimes and things like that. But I think that's just such a headache to balance. I think it's better to just pick the strongest hands that can't really call, or maybe the ones like on the cusp, and 3-bet those in that spot, rather than doing anything really tricky like I was with all these mixed strategies. This moves pretty fast, so I'm just going to let this go. I think I'll be holding this queen 7 too, unfortunately. But I remember through most of it, especially at Zoom, most of the video I'm involved in a pot. So and since I can kind of go on when I'm talking about hands, I think most of the time will be spent productively. Yeah. So we'll be calling eights. Probably. I mean, I think this is a fine 3-bet. Like I think 10-9 suited is strong enough to call, so 9 suited kind of like makes it seem. I guess this guy's kind of fishy, so I decided to call. That's fine. I think maybe 3-betting might have been a little bit better there, just to sort of like get him out of the pot and things like that. But I mean, it's fine. I don't need to worry. When decisions are close, it's just like, it's fine. Like we have much more important things to think about. That line's fine. I mean, I flop bottom pair, I'm trying to show it down. He bets, I fold 3-way. Heads up, it might be a lot closer. The 3-way, it's not close. I think I can peel here against the button. I said I think I can peel here. It's like, it is close. Because, I mean, definitely a backdoor flush draw, I think it would be a mistake not to peel. But without a backdoor flush draw, I can't say that I mind the fold much. Kind of just thinking back to earlier parts of this video, we saw king 10 of clubs, sort of c-bet in position with some, not c-bet, but bet in position with some marginal hands. So I think if I should have picked up on that, maybe just like, okay, yeah, I'll call one street here. So I don't love that, but it's definitely fine. It's super borderline in the first place. Yeah, I'm only going to comment on the pre-flop stuff when it interests me. I mean, queen 9 suited is probably a little bit too loose, but it's fine. I mean, queen 10 suited is definitely a raise. Queen 9 is borderline. So it's just whatever. Like, it's easy to fixate on decisions that are have almost no effect on EV. I prefer to look at decisions where I just like really mess up or where I just look great, although usually it's messing up. I'd like to see a flop. So I think like Jack 7 against aggressive blinds shouldn't be raised, but against passive guys it's probably fine. But that would be an exploitative adjustment. Just in general, when I say something like against this player I'm doing X, that usually means I'm talking at least somewhat exploitatively. And when I say like you should do Y, that means that I'm talking about optimal play or my guess at your optimal play. That's kind of a good sort of decoder of what I'm talking about. This is a marginal call with king 10. I was, I've been getting a lot of crap in these analysis threads where guys are like, yeah, why are you calling every 3-bet? And, they're kind of right. I mean, I call a lot of 3-bets. I probably call too many. Same with, maybe not with 4-bets. It's tricky in 6-max because I don't have the mechanics down as much. Like, heads up, I have a really clear idea of, what my ranges are. But in 6-max, there's all these bizarre spots where a guy like, min raises me from the hijack or something, and I opened under the gun, and everyone folds. And it's like, my hand is good. The thing in pillow is you call like every 3-bet. And when I'm sitting in no limit hold'em and I see like a suited connected hand and I'm getting a great price, it's really hard for me to fold. And I think that it's just really close and doesn't matter that much one way or the other. I can see, there's definitely big mistakes. Like say I opened in the hijack with queen 10 offsuit and I get 3-bet by the button. Say I opened 30 at 5-10 and he raises me like 110. If I called there with queen 10 offsuit, I think I'm burning money. I'm not sure how much money I'm burning calling here with king 10 of diamonds. My guess is it's probably fine. But, someone correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you guys have some simulation or analysis or strategic point I'm missing. You can be like, oh no, that's bad. It might be. Like, I think this is spewy. This 3-bet. Like, it's like, I can 3-bet there with 5-7 of diamonds, but I can find something better to 3-bet with. And for the same reasons I just said, I think I was doing this weird thing where I was like, oh, I want to, have a really hard to read range after 3-betting. Which is good, but it's not worth it. It's not worth the mental headache of trying to balance frequencies of a zillion different hands. We'll leave that for the computers. And I'm sure I'm doing a bad job. I think I was kind of like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to 3-bet that one in every few times or something. I have like kind of a counter in my head saying like, okay, I'll 3-bet it, every 1 out of 5 times I get it or something. But that's not too precise, and I don't have an analysis on hand being like, oh yes, you should 3-bet 7-5 the diamonds, 8% of the time. I have no idea. I'm just like, oh, I think that I want to make myself hard to read, which I don't think is a good justification. I'll be calling queen jack here. And there's a huge difference too. I mean, I'm a big fan of pot odds, as you guys can probably guess, especially when my hand has, connectivity, or is a pair, or has, something going for it. So, I mean, here it's just like, this guy can have 2s through 10s for sure in his raising range, and I have overs to those, and, I connect, so I'm just going to call there with this price. I think actually the flop keel is like, let's just take a second. This flop keel is actually, kind of close. It's like, I don't think I should fold, but it's kind of close. I mean, I need him to be betting 2s through 9s a good amount here, I think, to make my flop feel good. And I also need him to be showing those hands down sometimes. It's like, what are the pure bluffs that he's not at least double barreling in this spot? I mean, it's basically 2s through 9s, right? I mean, obviously he hit a 9 now. He had 9s. But, I mean, those are really the things that I'm being, and there's enough of those in his range that I should be able to call, especially given the fact that I have some equity against, like ace-jack, et cetera, et cetera. I have some equity against a lot of things. My gutter, matters quite a bit. I think if I had queen-8, should probably fold the flop. Unless he's c-betting 100% and not double barreling much, that seems kind of unlikely. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I see that spot. Another point on this hand is, like, when we're getting a great price pre, we can afford to call and fold more flops. That might still be better than folding more pre-flop and calling more flops. We have to sort of balance those two strategic options. Suited ace from the cutoff is very standard. I think the question here is whether to bluff or not. I think I might decide to bluff, and that's probably a pretty good play. It's like, what hands do I get to this spot with that aren't doing well? Because it's not like I'm calling the flop with like jack-8 of diamonds or something. I just need to fold that hand because this board is so good for under the gun. That being said, there aren't that many hands in his range that I'm probably folding out with my river bluff. It seems like maybe a better idea would be to check fold a hand like queen jack and maybe bet really big with a hand like, because I'm also not that nutty here. I have a lot of just equity against his bluffs, but not that much equity against his strong hands on a board like this. So, I mean, it seems like my strategy should maybe tend a bit more towards check raising, because, I mean, what hands? If he has jacks or 10s, I'm going to show down. If I bet, I need him to fold like ace 4, or like, I need him to fold king jack. I don't know. I mean, I think he might fold king jack if you even bet the flop with it. I don't see him folding ace 4 here, so I think this is a thin bet. And it seems like if I'm going to bet, it would be as part of some range that contains like a good amount of flushes, because I'm just not going to have that many 2 pairs here because my range is so much wider than his. So it's like, okay, maybe if I decide to lead with my flushes, I could bet 1.5x pot and bluff with queen jack, ideally with a club, but whatever. That might be fine. I think I should just check fold here, though. I think I ended up bluffing, but I think this is just sort of spewy again. Okay, good, I checked. I'm off the hook. It's a check fold. If I had the jack of clubs, maybe I can check raise. And not that he probably has that many hands that are flushes here. But it's more a balancing thing than anything else. It's very standard fold. I think I folded ace-9 from the cutoff there. I think that's a small mistake. The hand's strong enough. I think I was preoccupied with my other decision. A9 is going to be a defend. I wonder what this guy's name means. I guess it's long pole, maybe? I don't know. Maybe I just always see a sexual innuendo. Well, I can't find one in Shark Nebula. I wonder what that would be. Sounds dirty, though. 10-9 here against a min raise is just a snap call. That's just like, button range is wide. We're getting over 3 to 1. It's just very clear. Check call flop. Enough said. This turn's a little bit tricky. I think it's going to end up being a check call. Check call turn, check fold river, I think is the line here. I think that, looking at this board, I mean, it's just an equity thing. If he bet 150 on the turn, maybe we can fold. But he can easily be betting king jack on the turn If he's betting king jack like offsuit, and I have this 10-9 hand, I just have a bunch of equity against hands he can have. Not to mention he can be bluffing, and also my equity I should be able to realize a good amount of my equity since I'm gonna improve to a nutty hand sometimes, like I did in this deuce of hearts river. Now on the river here, my hand's good. I mean, I shouldn't really expect to be beaten much, that's for sure. I don't think I'll be beaten sometimes. Like, he might check back ace of hearts, queen X once in a while. Maybe that's a little bit too strong. Maybe he checks back. It's hard to even think of a hand that has ace of hearts that plays like this. But maybe he checks back ace of hearts, jack X or something. I don't really think so. And the point being that I don't think it's implausible that his range could be relatively uncapped here. But, I mean, the cards that I'm sweating here is like the jack of hearts, the king of hearts, and the ace of hearts, which are all, very frequent in his pre-flop range. But on this turn, it's like, okay, so if he has a jack of hearts, he has a flush draw and a gutter. If he has the king of hearts, he has top pair and second flush draw. If he has the ace of hearts, he has no flush draw. Those are all hands that just get barreled so much. But I think my 10 of hearts is looking pretty good here. Now, the other question is, okay, well, what am I bluffing with? I think 6x comes to mind. 8-7 is definitely bluffing. 10-8's definitely bluffing. Jack 10's a straight. If I somehow peel the flop with like ace of hearts, 10x, I guess that's a flush now. So yeah, I mean, pocket maybe black 7s and 8s could bluff too. That'd be maybe a little bit too wide of a bluffing range. So I have some bluffs here. So it seems like this has got to be a bet fold comes to mind here. Seems like about what the hand strength we're at, and we have some likely hands to play this way. Bet maybe 70 or 80 and then fold to a raise. So I checked, and I checked really quick. I think that sort of shows that I might have been playing a little sloppy during this part of the video. It's like, why am I just like, okay, check. I guess what I'm thinking is that I want to induce a bluff, because I think that he might bet once with like pure air, I guess, or he might turn a queen or a 9 that he checked back the turn with into a bluff. I think that's okay. I think my hand's a little bit too strong for this play. I can still bluff catch with an even smaller heart, or I can bluff catch even with king X or 2 pair or straight. I have plenty of bluff catching hands. I think I'm losing a bit of value. So I mean, like, there's another spot on the right. It's like, okay, well, I decided. It's like I'm not 3-bet bluffing king jack, but I'm 3-bet bluffing like 8-7 suited. I think that's fine. Really sort of similar in that spot maybe, but I'm not sold on my pre-flop play in this video. And it's good. I mean, I think my pre-flop play is good, but I don't think it was perfect. It wasn't perfect, shall we say? So this is another kind of awkward spot. I mean, like I said, I was betting $70, so my hand is like worth more than $35. But, I mean, the problem is his hand range is strengthened now. So, I mean, in optimal play, I think it's just the fact that, he decided to bet rather than check, which strengthens his hand range. And he decided to bet 35. And so even though I could have maybe gotten 70 for value if I had led, I think now I'm forced to just call. I think that it's sometimes tempting in this spot to just put him on exactly like 8-8 with the 8 of hearts and be like, oh, I'm going to min raise, or I'm going to make it 100, and try to get a little bit of extra value. But it's important to note, I think, it's important to note for me at least, that that's a very strong exploitative play. And it would be really easy for him to bet 3-bet a lot of hands if that was my sort of standard here. So we need a read to do that. I don't see why we have a read. Look at me, I want to do it. I think he doesn't have anything. Yeah, okay. So he was bluffing, worked okay. I just want to jump back 1 second. He bet the flop with 5-3 of clubs. I think that's fine. Backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. A lot of backdoor straight draws. Not the most, but good amount. Standard. This is pretty standard too. I think that if you think the guy's opening crazy wide, like I know there's some guys in mid-stakes who are opening like, 80%, 100% of the button. If that's happening, then you should 3-bet ace-10 off, especially if they're folding more than they should. Like maybe they're opening 90% of hands, but they're not calling a 3-bet without like queen jack. I know that fits the description of some players in the player pool. It's one of those guys, 3-bet ace-10, you're going to make more. But really, realistically speaking, I think against the min-raise in the button, you should probably call it. It's fairly close. Ace-jack, I would 3-bet. Depends, but everyone plays so crazy on the button these days, it's really tempting to 3-bet. Let's just pause for a second and look at this flop and turn action. King deuce 6-9. So there's two plausible lines on the turn. Oh, sorry. He bet the flop small. I guess the question I want to answer is why don't we lead the turn? And you might be like, oh yeah, maybe I want to protect my hand a little bit, get some value. I could be bluffing here. Like we can certainly think of a balance. Maybe not perfectly balanced, but balanced between value bets and bluffs. Range to play on the turn. So we could bet out with, say, if we had 5-4, if we had ace-jack. And then we could also bet out with queen of diamonds, jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, and maybe some of our ace of diamonds that we can't get blown off our hands as much. That'd be okay, but I think it's a useful simplification and a useful way to hide information just to check our whole range in the turn. Because presumably most of the hands on a king 6 deuce board that we bet on the flop, that we check call on the flop, most of them are either going to have a diamond in them or they're going to be a straight draw or they're going to be like a decently strong ace high, which is to say that most of them are going to have some showdown value. It seems like we're going to do better in this spot, trying to realize more of our showdown equity by just check deciding on the turn. And then we'll have a nice balanced range with a lot of diamonds in it. And we can still bluff some of our few bluff hands when the turn goes check-check. So we can bluff with our 5-4s and our ace-jacks later. We don't have really enough of them to want to bet the turn and then bet the river again. We just sort of run out of bluffs, which isn't so good. And anytime we create a polarized range, we make not anytime, but most anytime, we make a polarized range. We make our checking range more linear, and so that can invite overbets and invite him to value bet more thinly in things. So there's some range benefits for checking in this spot. Okay, so he bet the turn again, and the river's a 5 of clubs. I mean, obviously that's about as good a river as we could hope for our hand. I think our hand is going to be vulnerable on the river. Or sorry, borderline on the river. Vulnerable insofar as it's not in a good spot. So if he bets like 200, I think we can definitely fold. If he bets small, I think we're probably going to have to call. It's kind of like the hand strength that we're at. I don't expect to get bluffed all that often because it's not like he has any really interesting blockers here. He can't have a diamond to bluff with, otherwise he's value betting. And he doesn't want to bluff with a king because that just gives us more diamonds. So it's sort of a spot where I think a lot of guys don't bluff that much. So we may want to fold this in. On the left here against Giant Tony, ace-9 of clubs, our range is looking pretty strong on this board. King 6 deuce. He defended from the big blind as opposed to the small blind. So he's getting that good price, and so his range is going to be, or should be, quite a bit weaker. And then on this board, there's a lot of hands in his range aren't doing so hot. So, king queen, king jack, king 10 are going to hit top pair, but a lot of hands that he's peeling here, like say jack 9 of clubs and stuff, are just going to be doing badly. And because his hands are kind of connected, they're going to turn some backdoor straight draws and flush draws and push us off our ace-9's equity. So I would just tend to c-bet once here, mostly. Usually c-bet the flop, and then if the turn's not an ace or a 9, I tend to just give up. I would probably double barrel on some cards, like say the turn's a 5-4-3, maybe even a 2. That might be a fine double barrel. But you don't want to go crazy betting a ton of streets with a hand like ace-9 here. I like my flop play. And I think we can fold. Sort of like, okay, he's risking 80 here to win 100. And, we have one of the weakest bluffs in our range, or weakest in terms of its nuttiness potential. We're never going to make anything really strong with this hand. So, it's pretty easy fold. And then the river here, this sucks, it's betting kind of big. I would tend to fold here. This might be a spot we want to look at. If somebody wants to run a sim on this about my range and let me know what I should have done, that'd be helpful. Keep in mind, I'm playing a lot of hands here pre, so I'm not saying that I have to defend weaker hands to the river, but I'm just saying that, keep that in mind when you're looking at my range. And keep in mind that if you're doing a sim here, I'm check raising the flop sometimes. Probably check raising the turns sometimes too if I'm playing really well. But it's okay, I think, not to check raise the turn. I wouldn't worry too much about that. So maybe you can just have me check calling every turn or check folding, and then on the river, I'm certainly check raising the ace, obviously. So there we go. Let's see if I have to call with this hand. My guess is it's like pretty close, and I can kind of fold, especially since I think this guy's probably not bluffing that much. And like sort of my exploitative read on how much he's bluffing depends on like how he perceives my range. So if I think that he thinks that I'm calling like any two cards pre, and if I think he thinks that I'm peeling a lot of flops and turns, then maybe I'll think he thinks that I'll fold a lot of rivers because my hand range is relatively weak. On the other hand, I think in general he's just going to be scared of the board texture sort of, and just will assume that I'm defending a reasonable amount, and he's like not going to find enough bluffs. I'm like tank folding. Oh, I have a 3-2 and they're suited. Yeah, so bad call past Ben, as Phil famously or infamously says. I think I would have folded there now. And obviously I would have been right. That doesn't mean that I'm right against his range. But, it's something. It's a small piece of information. And Negrano has a lot of hair in that picture. So, this seems really tight to me. Yeah, I don't think I can fold King 10 here. I can call it raise. Seems like calling is the play. Seems kind of, especially when there's probably a weak player in the big. Seems really, really obvious to me. Good. Okay. I made it through that hand. This seems like an obvious 3-bet to me. I talked a little bit in one of the video threads about what sort of hands you want to be 3-betting with. And I was sort of making the case that most of the top players, at least in heads up no limit, are 3-betting more hands like 7-6 suited and less hands like, say, King 6 offsuit, even though King 6 offsuit obviously has a lot of equity. It has the blocker to the king. So I like the 3-bet here. I'm not going to get into that topic at length here, but just sort of something to think about. Playability is pretty important, and it will balance our range and a variety of flops. Okay, these are two sort of interesting spots. So on the right-hand table, we turn this, this nut gutter on a rainbow board. So anytime we have a nut gutter on a rainbow board, it's a pretty strong hand. On the other hand, it's difficult to find that many hands in the other two guys' ranges that are going to be worse than king high. So I don't know how well our hand functions as a bluff catcher. The one that springs to mind, obviously, is Jack 10. That's really it. So, Jack 10 would be, maybe he has some random hand like king 4. King 10 of clubs might have a hand like that we beat. Or he might, maybe he bluffs with air on the turn. Maybe he bluffs like 7-6. So, I'm okay with check calling turn, check folding river, and then we can obviously check raise on a jack, and that's going to be sort of unexpected. At the same time, there's 3 of us, and I don't really know what this kind of fishy guy is going to do. So it'd really suck to check here and have him bet 5-8, and then call, and then he checks back the river, and I'm just like, oh, well, I kind of got money in not so great spot. But, I guess check call is pretty okay here. We do have a bluff catcher. We have some nutty river outs. And how many better hands are we getting to fold here on the turn? Like, are we getting... Yeah, we're getting pocket 6s to fold, pocket 7s, pocket 8s. We're probably not... We might get a 5 to fold. So I guess maybe it's between betting kind of big and check calling. Check raising is, okay, but it's like... It's one of these spots where I think we can pick a better hand to check raise. We don't really have great blockers for check raising. So I think maybe my default would be check call with betting being bet fold, obviously being pretty good too. And then on the left here we flop. This is actually kind of it's kind of a pretty hand. King 7-5, mid pair and backdoor flush draw. I think it's a pretty standard check call. Not a terrible bet either, just because we're going to turn so many good things, but I think both these they're pretty medium strength hands. They're generally going to want to get check called, despite the fact that they have some nut potential. Yeah, so I do check here. Here I think I do decide to bet. So this is kind of the bet size that I don't love. It seems like if we're betting, we want to get at least some. We want to get like not the maximum amount, but quite a few better hands to fold. Also, we protect our equity, which is nice when we bet. So it's okay. But I would like to bet something more like 60, something like that, or at least 50. Put some more pressure on fives. And at the end of these two hands, by the way, I think I'm gonna call it a day for this video. I find that these things lag a little bit at the end sometimes. Okay, so this 7-6 of diamonds hand. So we check flop, check, check, and then it turns a queen of hearts and check, check. And it's like, there's something interesting about this queen of hearts turn, which is that, there's a lot of hands that he very plausibly could have checked back the flop with at least sometimes that turn fairly reasonable draws on the queen of hearts. So, 1, any backdoor flush draw. 2, anything that turns a gutter or an open ender. So Jack 10, 10, 9, Ace 10, all that stuff, Ace Jack. 3, anything that has a heart blocker. So he might, say he has Ace of Hearts, 8x, he might bluff the turn there. So when he just kind of snap checks the turn or checks pretty quickly on the flop on the turn, we should be thinking that he has something kind of similar to my previous hand strike. Now, obviously I prefer 2-pair. But I just think he has Ace 7 a lot, something like that, and like 8s, 9s, 10s. So he might bet 8s, 9s, and 10s once on the flop sometimes. So I'm really thinking, he might play Ace Jack like this too. I don't know if he bets that or checks that. So it's like, all right, well, he might have Queen X. That's a really likely hand. So I expect him to have a lot of pairs here and some ace highs. Sort of the range I'm looking at. And he might have a few slow play flushes, a few river 2 pairs, but obviously when I'm holding 2-pair, that changes. He might have pocket 6s for sure. But looking at this range, looking at his hand range, he has quite a lot of bluff catchers, I would say. And I think that's one thing that's quite clear on this river. That being said, my blockers do block his bluff catchers. However, my hand rather blocks his bluff catchers. That being said, though, I think that my hand's not strong enough to check raise here if he plays well. It might be that he almost never bets the river. Maybe he bets the river with ace queen and pocket 6s in the air, and then he calls the check raise with 6s, even though he never slow plays the turn and never checks back a flush draw. That's possible. But at the same time, I think even regardless of how he plays, just one of the spots where just this is a pretty standard bet, probably call. Just bet call. Although facing a raise is going to be ugly. I definitely agree on that. But the thing is, there are plausible hands for him to raise. Say he has Ace of Hearts, 5 of diamonds. I expect him to raise here a lot. So, I think bet call is just sort of the line. Our hands, it really makes sense that that's the right line too, because our hand is almost good enough to check raise, but not quite. So bet call is the play. I think I choose to bet pretty big. That's fine. I think an overbet would be not so hot. That's pretty big. I think that's a little bit too big. Okay. That's fine. I would bet maybe a tiny bit less here in hindsight, but I'm okay with that bet size. Certainly I do want to get a lot of money in and I want to charge his hands, but, because I think he does have quite a few ace highs and some 4s, 3s, 2s hands. Those hands probably aren't calling 130, but they may call 100 or 110. So I think that maybe a slightly smaller size is better, especially since I don't want to represent too polarized of a range here, especially because I want to bet call my 7-6. So it gets a little dicey to bet call if I bet 130 and he makes it 520. That's a spot where I'm not feeling nearly as good about my bet call. So I would have bet a little bit less there in hindsight. That's not a big deal. Okay. So we get a fold. Unfortunately, we can't see his hand range. We can just see that some of it was folding. And I think that's going to wrap it up for today. So I guess looking back at my own play today, I sort of think that I was making things a little bit too complicated for myself, maybe a little bit. And it seemed like I was hovering over decisions and thinking really hard, weighing lots of variables. Maybe I was taking in too much information and could have acted on more simple information. So maybe that's the lesson to take away from today. So I hope you guys have a good time at the tables. I was going to say have a good Thanksgiving because I'm in Canada and Thanksgiving comes early here. So I wish all the Canadians watching happy Thanksgiving. All right. This has been Ben Sulsky for RunOnce.com. See you next time.